it's Caitlin from Really Big Plant. Thank you so much for joining me. I've been observing some interesting adaptations in my collection recently, and I've noticed that I think these are adaptations I haven't really heard other people talk about, so I want to talk about a couple of interesting morphological characteristics about plants, and also I want to propagate a plant that I got kind of recently in the mail, and we'll do a couple different types of propagation and just show you some updates on some of the growth that I've been having in my collection recently. I also have a miracle that happened in my collection that I need to show you guys that really blew my mind. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but I think it's really cool. So some cool plant science things that I want to talk about today and just to show you some little updates. So let's get into it.
Really big plant.
Okay, I had a miracle happen in my plant collection with this plant. So this is my Philodendron billietiae. Billietiae, I think people say. I unboxed this in my last unboxing video, I think. It's a very new plant in my collection and it was a wish list plant for sure. I've been waiting years to get this, and the first new leaf that it tried to grow got stuck and the stem snapped. The leaf stem snapped when the leaf was trying to emerge. Sometimes you get that, have you seen that meme of a new leaf emerging, and it's like in Cinderella when the stepsisters try to put their foot in the glass slipper and their foot is all bent in half? It's so funny because it's so accurate. Anyway, a lot of times philodendron leaves in less than ideal humidity get stuck in their sheath when they're trying to emerge. And this one got super stuck. I did not notice that a new leaf was coming out because it was days after I got it and just wasn't checking it for new growth because I figured it was gonna acclimate for a few weeks. And I didn't notice the new leaf until I saw the snapped stem. And I felt devastated. I mean, it wasn't a big deal because it was just the leaf stem and it looked like the next leaf wasn't even going to be damaged in the way that it snapped. So really I was only losing one leaf on the plant. Wasn't a biggie, but I was pretty upset about it because I was very excited to get this plant and I wanted that new leaf. So I helped the leaf out of the sheath and I decided to try to do a little graft by just taping the leaf stem back together. It was hanging on by a thread. It snapped in half and it was hanging on by a thread. And I just grabbed the first roll of tape that I saw, which is actually a type of skin tape. It's like the tape that I use to tape my microphone onto my body. I used a little piece of it to try to stabilize the stem where it snapped. And mind you, this was when the leaf had not yet opened. The leaf was still rolled up in a cone. I didn't think that there was any way that that was gonna work. I was kind of just taping the stem to kind of humor myself. I don't know, I figured I would just give it a try. I guess there must have been part of me that thought that this could work because it still looked juicy. The ends of the stem still looked like they could be an open wound, you know, and grafting is a thing that happens in horticulture and agriculture all the time. So I figured maybe I could kind of tape it back together and see if I could revive this leaf. Over the next few days, the leaf opened. I couldn't believe it, but the leaf continued to unfurl. And I thought that maybe the leaf was just opening up as it was dying off, but then it started to harden off and it seems like it recovered. So I have this leaf on here. I mean, this just happened, so this is still a tender kind of new leaf. But at this point, this leaf has progressed enough in its development that I think it's fixed. So anyway, I just wanted to show that to you guys because I feel like that's crazy that this worked. When I've tried to tape a plant back together, it's never worked for me before. So I thought I would just share that with you guys because this was totally a miracle in my opinion that this leaf stayed on. And an additional miracle, when I was getting ready to set up for this video, I dropped this plant on the ground and it tumbled over and over and somehow this leaf didn't break off. So I guess it really wants to be on there. Yeah. This plant is tougher than I thought it was going to be. So I guess if you ever have a situation like that where one of your leaves snap, give it a try. Just tape it back together. By the way, did you notice how bright red the inside of the stem was? It's really beautiful that it's got this bright red color that can be expressed. It makes a lot of sense why the stems can sometimes look so orange. Okay, and then I just want to show you some exciting updates on some of my plants. So this, do you see this? This is my beautiful Philodendron Ruckus from Gabriella Plants, which is a philodendron hybrid, and this leaf Do you see how big this leaf is? This is the newest leaf on the plant, and it is the first enormous leaf that this plant has put out for me. So I potted this up a couple of weeks ago. We're gonna get it out of moss. I'm gonna get it out of here now and pot it up into this 4-inch pot in some more regular potting mediums. Okay, the weirdest thing just happened. This really smells like lemon to me. I don't know why. It's mysterious, but it has like a very strong citrusy smell. I have no explanation. This is the moss that was in the moss ball that the plant. I'll show you the rest of this plant. I think it's a really good example of sunburn. I burnt this plant pretty badly fairly shortly after I got it. I was really excited after I unboxed this several months ago, and going against the advice that was listed explicitly on the Gabriella Plants website not to put this into really bright light, I moved this plant immediately into a really bright light location because I was very excited about it and I just wanted it to grow really fast, and I instantly sunburned it a ton. So I just want to show you what sunburn can look like. So you notice that the sunburn areas just look like big crunchy brown patches. If it looks like you've got like concentric circles forming on your plant leaf, that is probably an indicator that you have some kind of bacterial or fungal infection. But if you just see like crispy, super crispy brown areas on your plant leaves, and you know that you exposed it to really bright light or some direct sunlight, that's just sunburn. So I just wanted to show that to you so you could see what sunburn looks like. But then yeah, look at how big this leaf is. This is the first really big leaf I've gotten on here. So just wanted to share that with you because that is very exciting. And it looks kind of different than the other leaves. It's like floppier. I mean, it just kind of unfurled a few days ago. Oh wait, there's already a new leaf on here. I just noticed there's another big leaf coming out, which is crazy because this leaf just grew in. Huh. All right, it really doesn't want to be in super bright light because I moved it into a much lower light location and is growing faster now. These are my pineapple propagations from several months ago. So both of these were from the tops of pineapple fruit, but this one was a fruit that I harvested that grew on top of a plant that I'd been keeping in my houseplant collection for a while that I ate in a video. And then this one was from a pineapple that I bought for eating at Costco and decided to try to propagate the top. So I gave an update on these plants, I don't know, like a couple months ago, and basically just showed you that like not much was happening, except for that this one was like really moldy and gross. And I said that it probably wasn't going to be able to grow any new leaves from the center because it looked like I had a little bit of crown rot in there. And then I mentioned that maybe this plant would have enough energy to grow a pup from the side of the plant. The inner part of this crown has started to grow all kinds of crazy mold, and I'm actually not sure if this one is gonna make it. It's possible that it could like try to produce a pup from somewhere on the side, maybe if it can muster the energy for that. And ta-da! That's exactly what happened. So there is a little baby plant that sprouted from the side over here because this stopped being able to grow from the center because I got this from the grocery store and it was gross and it had been frozen probably, and was molding in the center of the crown. But it sprouted a pup from the side, which is super exciting. So this is gonna live on. And my initial impulse had been to throw this away when I noticed all the mold in the center, and it obviously doesn't look great. I mean, it's very shriveled up and the leaves look kind of terrible, to be honest, but it did grow a little pup there, so I'm keeping this. I'm keeping this, and it's gonna hopefully grow a big pineapple someday. And this took months to get to this point. It was more than a season ago that I did this propagation. And it took a really long time for this to sprout. So if you've been wanting to try to grow a pineapple from the grocery store, you should just give it a try. And even if it gets gross, if it doesn't smell bad or isn't like attracting flies or isn't, creating a disturbance to your home environment, you should give this a go because it might sprout and it might take a lot longer than you think. And this is my other pineapple propagation, which is just growing from the center, but it didn't actually put out any new leaves until kind of recently. So again, it's been months of slow going on this, and I've noticed that whenever I propagate pineapples, it's kind of a waiting game because it seems like they're just not doing anything, and it can be pretty easy to just give up on it because there's no change for the longest time. But both of these are finally growing now, so hooray, pineapple plants. So this is an Epiphyllum oxypetalum, which is a type of jungle cactus, and this plant is known for its night blooming flowers that only last for a single night, and they are enormous and white and very short-lived and very, very fragrant. So this is a plant that I ordered a couple months ago in the mail, and it has put out a couple of really weird little things that made me realize we should talk a little bit about cactus anatomy. So Epiphyllum is a genus that belongs to a group of plants that get broadly referred to as jungle cacti because they are true cacti that grow in rainforest conditions, and they actually have access to a lot of water, and a lot more water than your typical cactus has access to when you think of a cactus and you think of like a saguaro or something like that. Those plants grow in the desert and they're used to very, very dry environments. These are a type of cactus that are used to getting rained on and getting wet and living in a really humid environment. And so unlike desert cacti, jungle cacti actually really appreciate a good amount of water. They don't like to sit in standing water, but they do like moisture. So these plants grow epiphytically, as their genus name would suggest, epiphyllum, which means that they grow on top of other plants. They like to attach themselves to trees or to anything they can grab a hold of and position themselves in a place where they could get some light. So if you have an epiphyllum or other types of jungle cacti, ripsalis, or the zigzag cactus, you might have gotten things that look like this, these super long skinny bits growing sort of in place of where you think a leaf should be. And what the heck is it? What the heck is this? I was looking this up to try to see what other people typically say about these, and almost everything I found on the internet is pretty much wrong about what these are. So I'm going to tell you, we're going to clear that up real quick and talk about what these long skinny things are that grow out of your epiphyllum and what to do about them. So the answer lies in the fact that these are true cacti, and the secret is in cactus anatomy. So back up a little bit about cactus anatomy. Desert cacti usually have spikes on them, spines, because they grow in an environment where it's very dry and they store a lot of water inside of them. And as a protective mechanism to protect themselves from animals that would like to get some of that water, they grow all of these spikes, spines, all on the outside of a cactus. That is their self-defense mechanism to protect their water. The spikes, the spines on a cactus are actually modified leaves, and the chunky body of the cactus itself is a modified stem or a modified branch. Of course, there are some exceptions because some cacti grow different types of spikes, but typically the spines on a cactus, those are actually a type of modified leaf if we look at a plant's evolutionary history. So on the epiphyllums, most of the epiphyllums don't even have spines to protect their water because they grow in a very moist environment and there's water all over the place. So they're not really holding this treasure inside of them in the same way that desert cacti are. And so believe it or not, on the epiphyllum, the jungle cacti, these big, beautiful things that we've been referring to this whole time as leaves are actually a type of modified branch or modified stems, which botanically, anatomically, is called a cladode, which refers to a type of flattened plant structure that serves as like a photosynthetically active leaf replacement. So this acts like a leaf. It serves the purpose of a leaf because the purpose of leaves is to do photosynthesis and to have chlorophyll in them so that the plants can use that like solar panels that help the plant produce energy that it needs. And so if you don't have leaves, you need something something else that can photosynthesize. And so these, which we call leaves when we look at this plant, these are actually modified branches that serve the same function. This is something that we need to understand in order to understand what these long structures are. And so I'm about to tell you something mind-blowing. These long, skinny stalks sticking out of the top are technically, and I mean in a technical sense, the same as these things that look like big floppy leaves. Now, obviously, they're different, right? I mean, they look different, but in terms of plant anatomy, they actually are considered the same type of plant part, and these don't even have a special name. I've seen online when I was looking this up that lots of people like to call these runners or stolons or even aerial roots, which is not correct. But technically speaking, these are actually just modified branches in the same way that these are. And epiphyllums and other types of jungle cacti can have polymorphic stems, which just means that they can grow in a variety of formats. Now, this isn't just like random, like this didn't happen for no reason. This is what the plant looks like when it gets etiolated, which means that it's stretching for light. It will grow this long, skinny version of its typical leaf or branch while it looks for light, and usually in my experience they widen up at the end or eventually do actually flatten out and grow wide, and if they're not, it usually means that the plant needs a little bit more light. But these are also something that the plant will just produce even if it's getting perfect conditions, because again, this plant has this polymorphic type of stem where this is actually a branch, and branches can grow in lots of different ways. When you reframe mentally that every single one of these is a branch on this plant rather than these all being leaves, it kind of makes more sense that they can all look very different from one another, because branches tend to be more variable than leaves themselves, which is why these plants grow in such a strange way. Sometimes you get a plant that sprouts off the side of an existing leaf, right? But what's actually happening is the plant is essentially branching. And so when you think of these as branches, the way that they grow somehow makes a lot more sense, because we understand that branches have these offshoots that can form even more offshoots. And so a lot of times when the plant grows these long, skinny bits, it'll grow another leaf from the tip of this leaf. And people think then that that means that this is like a runner on the plant, but it's not really. That's just sort of the plant's normal growth habit. One of the reasons why, though, if this is a response to low light, if you think about what a plant needs to do to grow up, when they grow the wide paddle-like leaf, they flop over and they grow down because their own weight pulls them down. But this skinny leaf has been growing straight up, and I'd imagine that it could grow quite tall before it needs to flop over. And so if you imagine that you're this plant and you grow this skinny piece and you're growing through the jungle and there's all these leaves above you, if you can shoot a skinny stalk up before you flop over, it's gonna help you grow up closer to the light. So this is this plant's way of just reaching up, and eventually these get wider at the top and it'll kind of flop down eventually. And if you imagine doing that in a jungle canopy and sort of speed up the timeline of this plant growing up, it's doing one of these through the canopy, right? So it helps the plant sort of get towards the top. And this does have these tiny little roots growing all out of the side of this cladoed or modified stem / branch, and they are like little aerial roots. And if this did come into contact with something that it could root into that had moisture, this would absolutely try to attach itself to that. So that's what's going on with these plants when they start to grow these very long stalks. They are just going through some of their normal growth. If every now and then it puts out one of these long, skinny branches instead of a normal looking leaf, that's just this plant having a little bit of variety in how it grows. I think that if it's only making these, maybe you need to assess your situation. It could be looking for more resources, or it could just be expanding, because this is able to get a lot taller than these other pieces. Sometimes I've noticed that these will grow into the full paddle-like, leaf-like shape, and sometimes they don't. I think that if they stay skinny for a really long time, they tend not to widen up too much at the base, but they will grow at the tip into something that looks more like a recognizable paddle-like leaf on here. Okay, so just wanted to tell you all about my epiphyllum and some weird cactus anatomy so that we could explain these long tendrils. I would love to hear from you on whether or not you have epiphyllums or plants that grow these long tendrils and what you tend to do about them, and if in your experience if they can develop into a fully normal looking leaf, or if they always stay skinny. In my experience, it's quite variable. This is a philodendron that I purchased relatively recently, and it came in the tiniest pot, and the plant itself is so much bigger than I thought it was going to be. So let me show you, pulling this plant out by the stem. The plant came in this tiny little 3-inch pot, and then the overall plant is enormous. It's quite long. It's a very long vine. So this is a Philodendron Camposportoanum, and it is clearly a viner, and the leaves do grow quite large in its mature form. But I do want to propagate this today because I ordered this kind of recently and I was expecting it to be a tiny plant, but it's just so much bigger than I thought it was going to be. And I was going to stake this up onto a pole, but I decided that this is actually so big already that I think I want to just chop and prop it. I have already been on a little bit of an adventure with this plant. I've only had it for a couple weeks, and it is thirsty like all the time because, as you can see, the plant is enormous and the pot is very small. And so I put it in this coffee mug here. I put it in this coffee mug and then gave it so much water and then forgot that I did that. And then it was sitting in standing water for a while, and the new growth just hasn't been looking super good, and I just want to propagate it. It's ready to be propagated. It's got all these aerial roots, meaning that it really wants to climb up stuff, but I also think that means it'll be very easy to propagate. Pretty much all the philodendrons that grow like this, you're going to propagate the same way, and that's just by cutting the plant up along the vine, not cutting off individual leaves, but cutting through the stem all the way. Anytime you propagate a philodendron like this one, you need to include at least one node in any cutting that you take. And the node is the part of a plant that is able to produce multiple types of plant parts. So the cells in a node are known as totipotent cells, which means that they are totally potent, as in they can become any type of plant part. So they can grow into roots, they can grow into a new leaf, they can grow into more branches, and on different types of plants, not all nodes can grow every type of plant growth, but typically the node is where you find stem cells, which are the cells that are able to then differentiate into multiple different types of things, but all start off the same. That's why you always see the roots and the leaves sort of bursting out of one general area, and then they'll be like bare parts of the stem that don't really have that much going on, and then you encounter another spot that's got roots growing out of it, leaves growing out of it, all sorts of stuff going on. Those areas are the nodes where all of the important growth action happens on a plant. I've got a cup for water propagation and a little pot filled with potting medium to do a soil propagation. We'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of both. All right, so this is a new leaf coming out. It doesn't look super good. I've admittedly not been taking super good care of this plant. Kind of just had it like sitting like this in a pile on the floor right over. And this is the newest leaf. It's pretty pathetic. I mean, it hasn't opened yet, which is why it looks so small, but you can tell that it's gonna be a really small leaf. And on the last node, which was down here, it didn't even grow a leaf at all. So this plant needs a little bit of help. I don't know if just this top piece without a leaf on it can propagate, but I'm gonna cut it up and we're gonna find out. Here's one. So then the next two nodes, you can see that this one has a leaf and this one does not. So this is a kind of easy choice. I'm gonna keep this one as a group of 2 nodes and cut this one down here. And so now you have this piece that's got 2 nodes on it and 1 leaf. And when I first started propagating vining philodendrons, I don't know, years ago, when I would do this, I used to always keep plants together in groups of 2 nodes and then cut off the bottom leaf. So if this node had had a leaf, I would have cut it off and then stick them into water for water propagation, because that allows the top leaf to stay out of the water, and this overall piece has more energy that it can utilize for the propagation. But there is a point where you don't want to keep too big of a piece of a plant to propagate it, because once you separate a plant from its root system, it does take a toll on that plant to try to keep itself alive, and it goes into this kind of emergency response overdrive where it wants to grow new growth and new roots and new everything. And if you leave a lot of plant material on, like if I wanted to propagate this, if I cut a huge chunk, it probably would be slower to grow than if you start with a smaller chunk. If you cut a really big piece, the plant does a little bit more of taxing its own resources to try to stay alive before it starts to look for new resources. So it'll start killing off the older leaves that are included in that piece you cut for propagation before it starts to shoot out a bunch of new roots. And so it can be kind of counterintuitive, but you're going to want to chop your vining plants into relatively small groups of nodes to propagate them most efficiently. Of course, if you keep the two nodes together, this is one propagation and it's going to only grow one new plant. Whereas if you take this and you cut it in half again, if these both successfully propagate, you will now have two plants. So you can see here that as I'm getting closer to the bottom of the plant, the internodal distance is getting shorter and shorter, and that's because at this point in the plant's life, it was getting better light. Then later in its life, the last several nodes were grown in my care in a low light, less than ideal situation, and the plant got really stretched out. And vining plants are really good at doing that. Part of their adaptation to grow as a climbing vine is to grow really fast to compete for light. So when they're not getting enough light, they grow even faster up into a point. After a while, eventually they sort of stop putting out leaves. So now we've got all of our pieces. This is what is left of my original plant. This is the oldest leaf that came on the plant, so it is understandably just like a little bit sad, a little tired looking. That's okay. It's probably not going to last too much longer, but I'm hoping that this bottom part has like an established root system in there. Hopefully we'll be able to propagate pretty quickly. And then, let's see these other pieces I have here. 2, 3, 4, okay. So the ones that have the longest internodes, I'm gonna just stick in water because that makes sense to me. Plus my end piece, which I'm not sure if it's gonna make it. And then I have my little pot of dirt here, which is actually just a potting medium. It doesn't have any compost in it. This is just coco coir and perlite, which is what I've been using recently. I like coco coir because it comes compressed and totally dehydrated, and I know that means that there are no critters living in it. There's no like little springtails or any little bugs like that, and I know those are beneficial. There are lots of types of insects that are technically beneficial, but I don't like them in my houseplants, and so I actually have found that I've been really enjoying working with the compressed coco coir that I then expand because it never has anything in it. There's never fungus gnats in it. There's never tiny little bugs that I can't identify in there. I've actually been really liking using it, and it's really cheap and eco-friendly, so this checks a lot of boxes for me. I have this one that I kept as 2. Should I keep it as 2 or cut it up? This is a lot of propagations actually, so I'm gonna just cut off the lower leaf and just cut this off. Bye leaf. And this leaf is not propagatable because it is no longer connected to a node. All right, and now I'm just gonna stick them in this soil. Okay, I'm gonna go put some water in my cup. When you fill your water, you just wanna make sure that at least one node on every cutting is covered by some water. Soil propagation versus water propagation. I'm gonna be honest with you, water propagation is kind of like bad practice. I mean, okay, you could do whatever you want. I'm always an advocate of doing whatever you want with your plants. If it makes you happy and that's how you want to do it, that's the right way. And if it can grow, as far as I'm concerned, if you're not eating it and it's not needing to like be crops for the people and stuff like that, if you can keep it alive and do whatever weird thing you want to do, that's awesome. I think that's a really cool thing about houseplants. But If we want to try to be more horticulturally, technically correct in our practices, water propagation is not really something that a professional is going to do with their plants, because roots that grow into water, directly into water, are fundamentally different from the types of roots that grow into soil. So if your intention is to ultimately transfer a plant from water into soil, you're kind of taking a step backwards in some ways, rooting it in water before you root it into soil, because when you put it in the soil, it's going to have to grow a new type of root to live there. And so a lot of times we do this thing where we water propagate plants, and you look at all the progress the plant is making growing all these roots, and those roots are actually not really able to be utilized very well by plants when you move them into soil. That's not to say that it doesn't do anything at all. Like, you can grow roots into water, and it obviously will then have a root system that when you transfer it into soil, it has roots. It's got more going on down there than, say, like the cuttings that are rootless. Long story short, water roots are really different than soil roots, because in soil, plants have constant access to oxygen. Theoretically, if you're not overwatering your plants and you put them in a nice aerated potting medium. But when you plant a plant in water, and especially if you put it in a cup or something like that, where it's not like running water from a stream that's being oxygenated all the time, or like a fish tank where you're running a bubbler for oxygen, this cup is eventually going to run out of oxygen, and that's not something that is visible to your naked eye. It's going to still look like water to you, but when a plant grows its roots directly into water, it has to adapt to an environment where it is actually very oxygen deprived compared to a soil environment. The roots have to grow different types of characteristics in order to try to draw more oxygen out of the water. And then when you put those roots into soil, the roots actually don't know what to do anymore, because they were used to being in a water situation. So when you transfer a water propagation into soil, it's really important that you keep the soil moist for the first like 2 weeks. You don't want it to be waterlogged, but you don't want to let it dry out too much, because what happens is if you let it get totally dry, those roots are used to being in water all the time, and now they're like a fish out of water. They might shrivel up and die off faster than they would otherwise. For all those reasons, it's a really good idea to try to plant propagations directly into potting medium. That being said, I'm always a proponent of water propagation if you're a new plant parent, because you can watch what happens. You can learn how the roots grow, and you can see as soon as there's a little bit of root growth. So if you do want to water propagate, the proper way to do it is as soon as you see tiny bits of roots developing, like as soon as you see the first new little roots growing, you're going to want to transfer them out of the water straight into soil. And usually that's only like going to be a couple days to a couple weeks, depending on the plant type and how woody versus herbaceous the propagation is that you took. But normally what happens is when you start to see the little root growth, it means that new growth has been essentially activated on that plant, and it means that you could transfer it out into soil. On my channel, if you've been watching my channel for a while, I've never done that. Okay, when I start water propagations, I usually leave them in water until the roots rot. It's not intentional, it's just, they can live for a long time in water. And then the problem that I have with propagating directly into soil is that if you are not like perfect at watering and are not good at knowing whether or not you have underwatered or overwatered, sometimes it can be really hard to get propagation started like this, because unlike on a mature plant that likes to dry lightly between waterings, you want to keep them very lightly moist until they start to grow new growth, because the moisture is the environment that triggers allowing this plant to create new growth. So it can be a little tricky sometimes, because you can be overwatering it and then it leads to root rot and getting a lot of fungus gnats. Basically, you can run into more improper watering problems with soil propagations. And the other thing, if you're really excited about your propagations and you're like checking on them multiple times a day, the soil propagation requires you to have a little bit more patience, because you can't see the roots grow. On some of these, even like this one, I buried the entire node in the soil so that it could stand up. So I won't even see new growth on that particular cutting until it's like grown about an inch. So it can be hard to wait, and it can be easy to think that there's no progress happening on a soil propagation. So if you're impatient, water propagations are really fun. Those for me are kind of like the pros and cons. And so while technically soil propagation might be like the horticulturally correct way to go, I really like water propagation because I like being able to watch the progress. It brings me more joy to watch the roots grow out into water, and you can still transfer them into soil. It's fine. The plants will grow. So long story short, do whatever you want. By the way, isn't this little mug cute? I like buying mugs as pots for my plants because they tend to be cheaper than 4-inch plant pots or the 3-inch ones. Like a plant pot this size, usually they're kind of expensive because they're so cute. So if you don't mind things having a handle, or if you can find cool ceramic cups, those are usually a less expensive option for a similar look. I'm updating you every time my Monstera Thai Constellation does anything at all, basically, but it's growing a new leaf and I thought I would announce it. It's been like 2 weeks since I repotted it and it's already putting out some new growth. I don't know if the repotting was responsible. This has been growing relatively quickly for me, but yeah, it's got this brand new leaf on here. Super excited to see it unfurl. I've noticed when I look at it now that it's got this white variegation only on the very tip of the leaf, at least from what's visible from the outside of the rolled up leaf, and it's like it's asking to turn brown. Because if you have experience with variegated Monstera, if there's like white variegation at the very tip of the leaf, down here, at least in my experience, it tends to turn brown pretty quick. So I think that has to do with how the plant gutates and eliminates water through the tip of the leaf and through other points, but it tends to gather at the tip. And I think if the white areas on the plant sit wet for too long, they become a lot more susceptible to weirdness and burning from light and all sorts of problems. So we'll see what happens with this leaf as it unfurls. Thought I just saw spider mites, but I think it's dust. Should I open this leaf up? You shouldn't do this. Don't do what I'm doing right now. I'm unfurling the leaf. Do you ever do this because you really, really want to see what it looks like? Anyway, yeah, super quick update on the Thai Constellation. It does have a new leaf growing. Hooray, very exciting. Okay. Put this back over here. All right, you guys, this has been a fun video. Thank you so much for joining me. It's fun to talk about a little bit of cactus anatomy today and do a little bit of propagating. I'm really excited because I took like, I don't know, like 10 plus cuttings of this philodendron, so I'm about to multiply it into a lot more plants, and I think I'm gonna have a pretty high success rate because it's a very vigorous grower, so hooray! I would love to hear from you with your experience on any of these plants, if your epiphyllums or jungle cacti grow these really long stalks and what you do about it, if you've ever miraculously like pseudo-grafted a leaf back together, or just what exciting new growth you've got going on in your collection. I would love to hear from you. This was just a really fun video for me to make. I love being able to talk to you guys about like technical, anatomical plant stuff. So yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so, so much for joining me. I hope that you are having a fantastic week and that your plants are bringing you joy. And I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye.